The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as soldiers gathered for the daily briefing. Among them stood Sarah Mitchell, a quiet woman with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything while saying nothing. Her small frame and reserved demeanor made her nearly invisible among the towering figures of her male counterparts. She preferred it that way. General Robert Harrison strode onto the field with his usual commanding presence. His chest was decorated with medals that caught the sunlight, and his voice boomed across the training area as he addressed the troops. Harrison had earned his reputation through years of service, but lately, he had grown comfortable in his position, perhaps too comfortable. "Listen up, soldiers," Harrison's voice echoed. "Today we're conducting combat readiness exercises. I want to see precision, strength, and tactical thinking." His eyes swept across the assembled group, pausing briefly on Sarah. A slight smirk crossed his face. "Some of you might find today's challenges particularly difficult." Sarah remained perfectly still, her expression unchanged. She had heard comments like this before, subtle digs that questioned her presence among the elite soldiers. The other troops shifted uncomfortably, sensing the underlying tension but unsure how to respond. The first exercise involved obstacle courses designed to test physical endurance and agility. Soldiers were required to navigate through mud crawls, rope climbs, and wall scaling while carrying full combat gear. As the whistle blew, Sarah moved with fluid precision, her movements economical and efficient. While others struggled with brute force approaches, she seemed to flow through each obstacle. Harrison watched from his observation post, his expression growing more skeptical with each passing minute. "Interesting technique," he muttered to his aide, Lieutenant Colonel Davis. "But technique won't save you in real combat situations." Davis, a seasoned officer who had worked with various special forces units, observed Sarah's performance with growing interest. There was something familiar about her movement patterns, something that reminded him of the most elite operators he had encountered. "Sir, her form is quite impressive." "Those are advanced techniques." "Advanced?" Harrison scoffed. "She's probably just trying to compensate for obvious physical limitations. Real warfare requires strength, not gymnastics." As the morning progressed, the exercises became increasingly demanding. Combat simulations, weapons handling, and tactical decision-making tests pushed every soldier to their limits. Sarah continued to perform with quiet competence, never boasting or drawing attention to her achievements, but consistently ranking among the top performers. During a marksmanship exercise, Sarah's shots grouped tightly around the center target from various distances and positions. Her breathing was controlled, her stance perfect, and her trigger discipline flawless. Other soldiers began to take notice, whispering among themselves about the quiet woman who seemed to excel at everything. Harrison's frustration grew more evident as the day continued. He had expected Sarah to struggle, to prove his point about the unsuitability of certain soldiers for elite units. Instead, she was making him look foolish in front of his men. "Anyone can shoot targets on a controlled range," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. But what happens when the pressure is real? When lives are on the line? Sarah finally looked directly at the general, her gaze steady and unblinking. For a moment something flickered in her eyes, a depth of experience that seemed at odds with her quiet demeanor. "With respect, sir, some of us have already faced that pressure." The comment was delivered so quietly that only those nearby heard it, but the weight behind her words was unmistakable. Harrison's face reddened slightly. "Is that so, soldier? And where exactly would you have gained such experience?" Sarah's response was simple and measured. "Various assignments, sir. Different theaters of operation." Lieutenant Colonel Davis frowned, pulling out his tablet to review Sarah's file more carefully. Her record showed standard infantry training and deployment history, but something felt incomplete. There were gaps in her timeline that seemed unusual for a regular soldier, periods marked only with classified notations. As the afternoon training session began, Harrison decided to escalate his challenge. "Since some soldiers seem to think they have extensive combat experience, let's test that claim. We'll be conducting live fire exercises with moving targets and simulated enemy contact." The exercise was designed to be extremely challenging, pushing soldiers beyond their comfort zones. Teams would need to advance through hostile terrain while under simulated fire, requiring both individual skill and team coordination. Harrison assigned Sarah to work with some of the less experienced soldiers, clearly hoping to see her struggle with leadership responsibilities. But as the exercise commenced, Sarah's true capabilities began to emerge more clearly. She moved through the simulated battlefield with an awareness that seemed almost supernatural. Her positioning was perfect, her communication with team members was precise and calm, and her tactical decisions showed a level of sophistication that surprised even the most experienced soldiers present. When enemy contact was simulated, Sarah's response was immediate and professional. She directed her team with quiet authority, positioning them for maximum effectiveness while minimizing exposure. Her own movements were those of someone who had clearly done this before, not in training scenarios but in real combat situations where mistakes cost lives. Contact left. 200 meters, she called out in a voice that carried just far enough to reach her team without alerting simulated enemies. Her tone was steady, professional, completely lacking the excitement or fear that typically marked soldiers in their first high-pressure situations. Harrison watched through binoculars, his expression growing more confused and irritated. This wasn't going according to his expectations at all. The quiet soldier he had dismissed was performing like a seasoned combat veteran, demonstrating skills and judgment that took years to develop. As the exercise concluded, Sarah's team had successfully completed their mission with minimal casualties and maximum efficiency. Other teams, led by more obviously experienced soldiers, had struggled with various aspects of the challenge. The disparity was becoming impossible to ignore. Interesting performance, Harrison admitted grudgingly as soldiers gathered for debriefing. But one good exercise doesn't make a warrior. Real combat is unpredictable, chaotic. It requires instincts that can't be learned in training. Sarah nodded respectfully. You're absolutely right, sir. Training can only take you so far. Her words were agreeable, but there was something in her tone that suggested she knew exactly what real combat entailed, perhaps more intimately than anyone present realized. The day was far from over, and tensions were clearly building between the general's preconceptions and the reality of Sarah's capabilities. Other soldiers were beginning to look at her differently, sensing that there was more to their quiet colleague than met the eye. The stage was set for revelations that would challenge everything Harrison thought he knew about the soldiers under his command. The next morning brought news that would test everyone's mettle. An emergency briefing was called before dawn, and the atmosphere in the command tent was tense. Intelligence reports indicated that a terrorist cell had taken hostages at a remote facility, and immediate action was required. General Harrison stood before a map, his usual confidence slightly shaken by the urgency of the situation. We have 12 hostages, including 3 American diplomats, he announced to the assembled soldiers. The facility is heavily fortified, and we have limited intelligence about internal layouts or enemy positions. Sarah listened intently from the back of the group, her mind automatically analyzing the tactical challenges. The facility was a converted industrial complex with multiple entry points, but each presented significant risks. The hostage location was unknown and time was running short. Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Davis spoke up. This type of operation typically requires specialized training. Perhaps we should request support from special operations units. Harrison's jaw tightened. He had been looking forward to a promotion review, and calling for outside help would reflect poorly on his unit's capabilities. Negative. My soldiers are more than capable of handling this mission. We don't need outside assistance. The planning session that followed revealed the complexity of the challenge. Traditional assault methods would likely result in hostage casualties, while stealth approaches required skills that most conventional soldiers hadn't mastered. Harrison assigned various roles to his men, but it became clear that critical expertise was missing from their tactical options. During a brief break in planning, several soldiers gathered around coffee, discussing their concerns in hushed tones. Sergeant Mike Torres, a veteran with multiple deployments, shook his head grimly. This isn't going to work. We need people who specialize in hostage rescue operations. What about Mitchell? Suggested Corporal James Chen, nodding towards Sarah, who sat alone reviewing facility blueprints. She seems to know more than she lets on. Torres followed his gaze. She's competent, but this is way beyond regular infantry training. We're talking about precision operations under extreme pressure. Unknown to the others, Sarah was conducting her own analysis of the situation. Her trained eye identified multiple approach vectors, potential breach points, and tactical considerations that the official planning session had missed. She recognized the facility type from previous operations and understood the likely defensive arrangements. As the team prepared for departure, Harrison made his final assignments. Mitchell, you'll be with the perimeter security team. Your job is to watch for external threats while the real soldiers handle the rescue operation. Sarah accepted the assignment without protest, but Lieutenant Colonel Davis pulled her aside before departure. Soldier, I've been reviewing your file. There are some interesting gaps in your service record. Care to explain? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Some assignments don't appear in standard personnel files, sir. Security classifications, Davis nodded slowly. He had suspected as much, but protocol prevented him from pressing the issue further. If there's anything you think we should know about this mission, now would be the time to speak up. I'm here to follow orders, sir, Sarah replied. But as she spoke, she was mentally preparing for the possibility that she might need to deviate from those orders to save lives. The convoy reached the staging area as afternoon shadows began to lengthen. The industrial facility loomed ahead, its concrete walls and limited windows creating a fortress-like appearance. Intelligence updates confirmed that negotiations had failed and hostages were in immediate danger. Harrison established a command post and deployed his forces according to his predetermined plan. The main assault team would breach the front entrance while flanking units secured the perimeter. It was a straightforward approach that prioritized speed over subtlety. Sarah took her assigned position on the perimeter, but her position offered an excellent view of the facility's layout. Through her scope, she observed details that the official reconnaissance had missed. Guard positions, movement patterns, and structural vulnerabilities became clear to her experienced eye. Alpha Team, prepare for breach. Harrison's voice crackled through the radio. Execute on my command. What happened next unfolded exactly as Sarah had feared. The assault team approached with textbook precision, but their technique was suited for military targets, not hostage rescue operations. The explosive breach was too aggressive, the subsequent entry too loud and chaotic. Immediately, gunfire erupted from multiple positions within the facility. The terrorists had been prepared for a conventional assault and had positioned themselves to maximize casualties among attacking forces. Within minutes, 2 soldiers were wounded and the assault team was pinned down in the entrance corridor. We're taking heavy fire, came the desperate radio call. Multiple hostiles, unknown positions? We need immediate backup! Harrison's face went pale as he realized his plan was failing catastrophically. The hostages were now in greater danger, his men were trapped, and time was running out. All units converge on the main entrance. Provide covering fire for extraction. But Sarah knew that throwing more soldiers into the same trap would only create more casualties. The situation required a completely different approach, one that prioritized stealth, precision, and intimate knowledge of close-quarters combat in confined spaces. From her perimeter position, she had identified an alternative entry point that the official planning had overlooked. A maintenance shaft connected to the facility's ventilation system offered access to the building's interior without alerting the defenders. But using it would require her to abandon her assigned position and act without authorization. The radio chatter grew increasingly frantic as the situation deteriorated. Alpha Team is trapped. Bravo Team, what's your status? Harrison's voice betrayed growing panic as his carefully planned operation fell apart. Sarah made her decision. She quietly slipped away from her assigned position and moved toward the ventilation access point she had identified. If she was right about the facility's layout, she could reach the hostage location without alerting the defenders, but it would require skills and knowledge that were supposed to be far beyond her official training. Meanwhile, in the command post, Lieutenant Colonel Davis noticed Sarah's absence from her position. Sir, Mitchell has left her post. I don't see her on the perimeter. Harrison's attention was focused on the failing assault and he barely registered the comment. Probably got scared and took cover. We'll deal with disciplinary issues later. But Davis continued scanning the area with binoculars, sensing that something significant was happening that they didn't understand. Sarah Mitchell was becoming more of a mystery with each passing hour, and he suspected that her true nature was about to be revealed in the most dramatic way possible. Inside the facility, the terrorists were growing more aggressive as they realized they had successfully repelled the initial assault. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and conventional military tactics were proving inadequate for the unique challenges of the hostage rescue operation. The stage was set for Sarah to reveal capabilities that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. Sarah moved through the maintenance shaft with practiced silence, her breathing controlled and her movements precise. The cramped space would have challenged most soldiers, but she navigated it with the fluid efficiency of someone who had done similar infiltrations many times before. Every sound was calculated, every movement designed to avoid detection. The ventilation system led her deep into the facility's interior, past the defensive positions that had trapped the assault team. Through the metal grating, she could hear terse communications between terrorists as they coordinated their response to the ongoing siege. Their discipline was professional, confirming her suspicion that these weren't amateur extremists. "Perimeter teams report no movement," came a voice in accented English. "The soldiers are still trapped at the main entrance. We maintain control of all hostages." Sarah paused at a junction in the ventilation system, consulting her mental map of the facility. The hostages would most likely be held in the central conference room, a location that offered the terrorists maximum control while minimizing their exposure to external assault. Her route would take her directly above that area. Meanwhile, outside the facility, the situation continued to deteriorate. General Harrison's conventional assault had stalled completely, with his men pinned down under heavy fire. Medical teams were preparing to treat additional casualties, and ammunition was running dangerously low. "Sir, we need to consider alternative approaches," Lieutenant Colonel Davis urged. "This frontal assault isn't working." Harrison wiped sweat from his forehead, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "What do you suggest?" "We can't just leave those hostages in there. Special operations protocols, sir. This requires precision tactics, not overwhelming force." "We don't have special operations personnel available," Harrison snapped, his frustration evident. "We work with what we have." Davis continued scanning the perimeter with his binoculars, still unable to locate Sarah. Something was nagging at him about her disappearance, but he couldn't quite identify what. In his experience, soldiers didn't just vanish during combat operations unless they were either dead or operating at a level far beyond their apparent training. Inside the facility, Sarah had reached her target position. Through a ventilation grating, she could see into the main conference room where 12 hostages sat bound and guarded by 4 armed terrorists. The hostages included the 3 American diplomats mentioned in the briefing, plus several local officials and security personnel. The terrorists were well positioned, with overlapping fields of fire and clear sightlines to all entrances. Any conventional rescue attempt would result in multiple hostage casualties before the attackers could neutralize the guards. The situation required a completely different approach. Sarah assessed the tactical situation with professional detachment. The guard positions, weapon types, and hostage arrangements all suggested that these terrorists had received advanced training in hostage operations. Their leader, a bearded man with calm eyes, moved with the confidence of someone who had planned for exactly this scenario. "Status report from all positions," the leader called out in his accented English. "How much longer until we can expect government negotiators?" "Unknown, sir," replied one of his subordinates. The soldiers outside seemed focused on direct assault rather than negotiation. The leader nodded grimly. "Then we proceed with the original timeline. Prepare for final phase implementation." Sarah understood immediately that the terrorists were planning to execute the hostages. Time had run out for conventional rescue approaches. She quietly removed the ventilation grating and prepared for an entry that would require every skill she had acquired through years of specialized training. Her equipment was limited to what a standard infantry soldier would carry, but her knowledge extended far beyond standard infantry tactics. She checked her sidearm, confirmed her knife placement, and mentally rehearsed the sequence of movements that would be necessary to neutralize 4 armed guards before they could harm the hostages. The first guard was positioned near the room's main entrance, his attention focused on the corridor where he expected any assault to originate. Sarah dropped silently from the ceiling behind him, her movement so quiet that even the hostages didn't notice her presence initially. Her knife found its target with surgical precision, and the guard collapsed without making a sound. The suppressed weapon she took from him would be essential for the next phase of the operation. The second guard turned at some subtle sound, but Sarah was already moving. Her training had taught her that speed and violence of action were essential in close-quarters combat. The guard managed to raise his weapon halfway before Sarah's shots found their mark. The remaining 2 guards reacted with professional speed, but they were facing an opponent whose skills exceeded their expectations. Sarah moved through the room like a force of nature, using furniture and hostages for cover while systematically eliminating threats. "What the hell?" shouted the terrorist leader as he realized his carefully planned operation was falling apart. He raised his weapon toward the nearest hostage, but Sarah was already moving to intercept. The final exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. When the shooting stopped, all 4 guards were neutralized and the hostages were unharmed. Sarah moved quickly to cut their restraints, her movements efficient and professional. "Stay low and follow my instructions," she told the hostages in a calm voice. "We're going to exit through the rear corridor." The American diplomat stared at her in amazement. "Who are you? How did you do that?" Sarah was already checking the corridor for additional threats. "Just a soldier doing her job, sir. Please stay close and remain quiet." Outside the facility, the sudden cessation of gunfire from the interior confused everyone at the command post. "What's happening in there?" Harrison demanded. "Alpha Team, report your status." "No change here, sir," came the response from the trapped assault team. "We're still pinned down at the main entrance." Lieutenant Colonel Davis frowned as he studied the facility through his binoculars. "Sir, something's happening at the rear exit." "I see movement." Through his scope, Davis watched in disbelief as a small figure emerged from the building's rear entrance, followed by all 12 hostages moving in a coordinated tactical formation. The figure's movements and the way the hostages followed instructions suggested professional military rescue procedures. "Sir, the hostages are coming out the back," Davis reported, his voice filled with confusion. "Someone got them out." Harrison grabbed the binoculars and stared in amazement. "That's impossible. All my teams are accounted for. Who could have penetrated the facility?" As the group of rescued hostages moved toward their position, Davis recognized the lead figure with growing astonishment. It was Sarah Mitchell, moving with a confidence and authority that seemed completely at odds with her quiet demeanor. The transformation was so complete that he barely recognized her as the same person. "Sir," Davis said slowly, "I think we need to have a serious conversation with Mitchell about her background." The hostages reached safety, all unharmed and praising their mysterious rescuer. The American diplomat immediately approached the command post, eager to report on their rescue. "General, that soldier saved all our lives," he declared. "I've never seen anything like it. She moved like a professional special operations operative." Harrison stared at Sarah as she approached, her expression once again quiet and unassuming. But now he was beginning to understand that her silence wasn't due to timidity or lack of confidence. It was the controlled reserve of someone who possessed capabilities far beyond what anyone had imagined. The mission was complete, but questions were just beginning. Who exactly was Sarah Mitchell, and what kind of training did she really have? The answers would challenge everything Harrison thought he knew about the soldiers under his command. The debrief session that followed was unlike anything General Harrison had ever experienced. The rescued hostages couldn't stop talking about their mysterious savior, describing tactical procedures and combat skills that seemed impossible for a regular infantry soldier to possess. "She appeared out of nowhere," explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, one of the American diplomats. "One moment we were facing execution, the next moment our captors were neutralized with surgical precision. I've worked with security details around the world, General, and I've never seen anything like it." Harrison sat in stunned silence as the reports continued. Every hostage described the same professional efficiency, the same calm authority, and the same advanced tactical knowledge that belonged in special operations units, not regular army companies. Lieutenant Colonel Davis pulled Sarah aside as the formal statements were being recorded. "Mitchell, I need answers. Your personnel file shows standard infantry training, but what we witnessed today requires years of specialized instruction. Where did you acquire these skills?" Sarah maintained her composed demeanor, but something had shifted in her posture. The successful mission seemed to have awakened a confidence that had been carefully hidden beneath her quiet exterior. "Sir, some training programs aren't reflected in standard personnel records. Classification levels vary depending on operational requirements." "What classification level are we talking about?" Davis pressed. "And which training program specifically?" "Sir, I believe those questions would need to be directed through appropriate security channels," Sarah replied. "My current assignment is with this unit, and I'm focused on fulfilling those responsibilities." Davis nodded slowly, recognizing the careful language of someone who had been trained in operational security procedures. He had worked with enough classified programs to understand that some soldiers carried backgrounds that extended far beyond their apparent assignments. Meanwhile, Harrison was struggling to process the implications of what had occurred. His carefully planned assault had failed completely, while a soldier he had dismissed as inadequate had single-handedly rescued all the hostages. The contrast was embarrassing and potentially career-damaging. "Mitchell," Harrison called out sharply. "Front and center." Sarah approached the general's position with military precision, her bearing now noticeably different from the subdued presence she had maintained previously. Other soldiers watched with fascination, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. "Soldier, I want a full explanation of what happened in that facility," Harrison demanded. "How did you access the building without authorization? How did you know the hostage location? And where exactly did you learn those combat techniques?" Sarah stood at attention, her response measured and professional. "Sir, I observed tactical opportunities that weren't being utilized. I made the judgment that immediate action was necessary to prevent hostage casualties." "That doesn't answer my questions," Harrison pressed. "I want to know about your training background. Your file shows standard infantry progression, but today's performance suggests otherwise." "Sir, my training has been comprehensive," Sarah replied carefully. "Multiple programs, various specializations. The details would require security clearance verification." The exchange was interrupted by the arrival of a black SUV with government plates. Two men in civilian clothes emerged and walked directly toward the command post, their bearing suggesting high-level authority. Lieutenant Colonel Davis recognized them immediately as intelligence operatives. "General Harrison?" The lead agent extended his hand. "Agent Marcus Webb, Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to discuss recent events and personnel assignments." Harrison shook hands warily. "Agent Webb, I assume this is about the hostage rescue operation?" "Among other things," Webb replied, his gaze moving to Sarah. "We understand that Operative Mitchell played a significant role in today's success." The word, operative, hung in the air like a bombshell. Harrison's face went pale as the implications became clear. "Operative? I was told Mitchell was regular infantry assigned to my unit for standard training purposes." Webb smiled grimly. "Cover assignments are necessary for ongoing operations, General. Sometimes the most effective operatives are those who appear most ordinary." Agent Webb's partner stepped forward. "Sarah Mitchell is actually Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy SEALs. She's been operating under deep cover as part of a classified assessment program." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled soldiers. The quiet woman they had known as a regular infantry soldier was actually one of the military's most elite special operations personnel. Everything about her behavior, her skills, and her mysterious background suddenly made perfect sense. Harrison struggled to maintain his composure as the full scope of his error became apparent. "A Navy SEAL? But her file, her assignment to my unit—" "Cover for status," Webb explained. Lieutenant Mitchell was conducting operational assessments of conventional unit capabilities and leadership effectiveness. Today's mission provided an unexpected opportunity to evaluate crisis response procedures. Sarah remained at attention, but her expression had changed subtly. The careful mask of anonymity was no longer necessary, and her true professional confidence was beginning to show through clearly. "Sir," she addressed Harrison directly. "Permission to speak freely." Harrison nodded, his voice barely functioning. "Granted." "Today's operation could have been successful using proper hostage rescue protocols," Sarah explained. "The facility layout was conducive to stealth entry, and the terrorist positions were predictable based on standard defensive arrangements. With appropriate tactical planning, casualties could have been minimized while ensuring hostage safety." Her words were delivered without malice or criticism, but the professional assessment was devastating. She was explaining how the mission should have been conducted by someone who actually understood special operations procedures. Lieutenant Colonel Davis found his voice first. "How long have you been with our unit under cover?" 6 weeks, sir," Sarah replied. "My assignment was to evaluate training effectiveness and leadership decision-making under various stress conditions." Harrison realized that every interaction they had shared, every dismissive comment he had made, had been observed and evaluated by one of the military's most elite operatives. His treatment of her hadn't just been inappropriate. It had been professionally disastrous. Agent Webb continued the briefing. Lieutenant Mitchell's assessment report will be forwarded through appropriate channels. However, given today's events, her cover assignment is obviously compromised. What happens now? Davis asked. Lieutenant Mitchell will return to her regular SEAL team assignment, Webb explained. Her temporary duty with this unit is concluded. As the reality of the situation sank in, the other soldiers began looking at Sarah with newfound respect and amazement. The quiet colleague they had barely noticed was actually one of the most highly trained warriors in the entire military. Sarah addressed the group with a slight smile. "You're all excellent soldiers with strong potential. Today's challenges were difficult for any unit, regardless of training level." Her words were gracious, but everyone present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The mild-mannered woman who had blended invisibly into their unit was actually a world-class special operations professional who had been evaluating their performance the entire time. Harrison stood in stunned silence, realizing that his career would never recover from this revelation. His dismissive treatment of a Navy SEAL, his failed tactical planning, and his inability to recognize exceptional capability when it was directly in front of him would follow him for the rest of his military service. The following morning brought an official inquiry that would determine the future careers of everyone involved. Senior military officials had arrived during the night to investigate both the successful hostage rescue and the circumstances that had made such an unconventional operation necessary. Colonel Patricia Reynolds, a stern woman with decades of command experience, led the investigation panel. She had reviewed all reports, interviewed the rescued hostages, and studied the tactical decisions that had led to the crisis. Her reputation for thorough analysis and fair judgment was well established throughout the military hierarchy. "General Harrison," Colonel Reynolds began, "please explain your tactical planning for yesterday's hostage rescue operation." Harrison stood before the panel, his confidence from previous days completely evaporated. "Ma'am, I based our approach on standard assault procedures for hostile facility penetration. The plan called for rapid entry with overwhelming force to minimize terrorist response time. And did you consider alternative approaches that might have prioritized hostage safety over speed of execution?" Harrison hesitated, realizing that his answer would reveal the fundamental flaws in his thinking. "Ma'am, we worked with the personnel and capabilities available to us. I believed our approach represented the best chance for success with conventional forces." Colonel Reynolds turned to Lieutenant Colonel Davis. "Davis, were you aware of any special operations capabilities within your unit?" "No, ma'am. Not until after the operation was complete. Mitchell's true background was classified beyond our access level." "Lieutenant Mitchell," Reynolds addressed Sarah directly, "please describe the tactical situation as you observed it yesterday." Sarah stood with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to high-level briefings. "Ma'am, the facility layout favored stealth infiltration over direct assault. The terrorist positions were arranged to maximize casualties among conventional assault forces, but they had not prepared for internal penetration through alternative entry points. In your professional assessment, could the official plan have succeeded without significant casualties?" "Unlikely, ma'am. The tactical approach was sound for military targets, but inappropriate for hostage rescue scenarios. Different skill sets and procedures are required for operations where civilian safety is the primary objective." Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "And your decision to act independently rather than following your assigned role?" Sarah's response was measured and professional. "Ma'am, the situation was deteriorating rapidly, and hostage lives were in immediate danger. I made the tactical judgment that alternative action was necessary to prevent casualties." The inquiry continued for several hours, examining every aspect of the failed operation and the unauthorized rescue that had followed. It became increasingly clear that Harrison's leadership had created a dangerous situation that could have resulted in multiple deaths without Sarah's intervention. During a brief recess, Harrison found himself alone with Sarah for the first time since her true identity had been revealed. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by a mixture of embarrassment and genuine curiosity. Lieutenant Mitchell," Harrison began awkwardly, "I owe you an apology. My behavior toward you was inappropriate and unprofessional." Sarah nodded respectfully. "Sir, You responded based on the information available to you. Cover assignments are designed to be convincing. But I made assumptions, Harrison continued. I judged your capabilities based on appearances rather than performance. That's a failure of leadership on my part. Sir, everyone makes judgments based on initial impressions. The key is remaining open to new information when it becomes available. Harrison appreciated her diplomatic response, but he understood that his career was effectively over. Word of his poor judgment would spread throughout the military hierarchy, making future command assignments impossible. When the inquiry resumed, Colonel Reynolds announced the panel's preliminary findings. Based on our investigation, we have identified significant deficiencies in tactical planning and leadership judgment that created unnecessary risks for both military personnel and civilian hostages. She paused to ensure her words carried appropriate weight. However, we also recognize that exceptional performance by Lieutenant Mitchell prevented what could have been a catastrophic outcome. The formal recommendations would follow in written reports, but everyone present understood the implications. Harrison's military career was finished, while Sarah's actions would be recognized as exemplary service under extraordinary circumstances. Agent Webb approached Sarah as the formal proceedings concluded. Lieutenant, your SEAL team commander has requested your immediate return. There's a situation developing in Southeast Asia that requires your particular expertise. Sarah nodded, already mentally shifting back to her primary operational role. Her temporary assignment as an undercover analyst was complete, but her real career as a special operations professional was just continuing. Before departing, she addressed the assembled soldiers one final time. You're all capable warriors with strong potential. Yesterday's challenges were extreme, and not every situation requires special operations solutions. Focus on your training. Trust your teammates and remember that true strength often comes from unexpected sources. Lieutenant Colonel Davis stepped forward as she prepared to leave. Lieutenant, it's been an honor serving with you even under these circumstances. Your professionalism has been exemplary throughout this entire situation. Thank you, sir. This unit has many strengths. With proper leadership and continued training, you'll be ready for any challenges that come your way. As Sarah walked toward the waiting government vehicle, the other soldiers watched with a mixture of respect and amazement. The quiet woman who had spent 6 weeks among them, enduring dismissive comments and subtle discrimination, was actually one of the military's most elite warriors. Sergeant Torres shook his head in wonder. 6 weeks we worked alongside a Navy SEAL and never suspected anything. Makes you think about how much you really know about the people around you. Corporal Chen nodded thoughtfully. She never bragged, never showed off, never made anyone feel inferior. Even when the general was giving her a hard time, she just took it professionally. That's what real confidence looks like, Torres replied. When you know what you're capable of, you don't need to prove it to everyone around you. The black SUV pulled away from the military base, carrying Sarah back to her real assignment with SEAL Team Operations. Her brief time as an undercover analyst was over, but the impact of her presence would be felt for years to come. Harrison stood watching the vehicle disappear, finally understanding that true leadership meant recognizing and developing talent, rather than making judgments based on superficial characteristics. His lesson had come too late to save his career, but perhaps it would benefit the next generation of officers who learned from his mistakes. The base settled into a thoughtful quiet as everyone processed the extraordinary events they had witnessed. A quiet female soldier had revealed herself to be one of the military's most elite operatives, demonstrating that heroism often comes from the most unexpected sources, and that true strength doesn't always announce itself loudly. 3 months after Sarah's departure, the military base had transformed into a model of professional excellence. The events surrounding her revealed identity had sparked a comprehensive review of leadership practices and training protocols that extended far beyond Harrison's failed command. Colonel Patricia Reynolds had been assigned as the new commanding officer, bringing with her a reputation for developing talent and recognizing potential regardless of traditional expectations. Her first priority was implementing changes that would prevent future failures of leadership judgment. Leadership isn't about commanding respect through intimidation, Reynolds addressed the assembled officers during her first staff meeting. It's about earning respect through competence and developing the capabilities of everyone under your command. Lieutenant Colonel Davis had been promoted to deputy commander, his thoughtful observations during the crisis demonstrating the kind of analytical thinking that effective leadership required. He now oversaw training programs that emphasized adaptability and recognition of individual strengths. The soldiers who had served alongside Sarah found themselves changed by the experience. Sergeant Torres had been selected for advanced leadership training, his insights about teamwork and professional respect impressing the new command structure. "She showed us that strength comes in many forms," Torres explained to a group of new recruits. "The most dangerous warrior in our unit turned out to be someone we barely noticed. That taught me to pay attention to substance rather than appearances." Corporal Chen had discovered an aptitude for tactical analysis that had gone unrecognized under the previous command. Colonel Reynolds encouraged his development, providing additional training opportunities that allowed his natural abilities to flourish. "The lieutenant never made any of us feel stupid for missing what she could see," Chen reflected. "She understood that different people have different strengths, and real teamwork means using everyone's capabilities effectively." Meanwhile, former General Harrison had requested early retirement, his career effectively ended by the inquiry findings. The official reports had been damaging but not entirely without compassion, recognizing that his failures stemmed from poor judgment rather than malicious intent. In his final interview with military investigators, Harrison had shown genuine remorse for his mistakes. "I allowed personal biases to cloud my professional judgment," he admitted. "A soldier under my command possessed capabilities that could have prevented the entire crisis, but I was too arrogant to recognize them." His case became a study example. In military leadership courses, teaching future officers about the importance of recognizing talent and the dangers of making assumptions based on superficial characteristics. The rescued hostages had also been profoundly affected by their experience. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the American diplomat, had requested a meeting with Navy SEAL Command to formally commend Sarah's professionalism during the rescue operation. "Lieutenant Mitchell's actions saved 12 lives," Walsh wrote in her official statement. "But more importantly, her behavior demonstrated the highest standards of military professionalism under extreme pressure. She treated every hostage with dignity and ensured our safety while completing an extraordinarily dangerous mission." The diplomatic community had been briefed on the circumstances of their rescue, leading to increased respect for special operations capabilities and better understanding of how elite military units operate in crisis situations. 6 months after the incident, Sarah herself returned to the base for an unexpected visit. She was accompanied by her SEAL team commander, who was conducting liaison meetings with conventional forces to improve cooperation between special operations and regular military units. The reunion was emotional for everyone involved. Sarah appeared, exactly as she had during her undercover assignment, her quiet demeanor unchanged by the recognition her actions had received. But the soldiers who greeted her now understood that her modest bearing concealed extraordinary capabilities. "Lieutenant," Sergeant Torres called out with genuine enthusiasm, "it's great to see you again." Sarah smiled warmly, her professional reserve softening as she reconnected with former colleagues. "Sergeant Torres, I hear you've been selected for advanced training. That's excellent news." "Thanks to lessons learned from working with you," Torres replied. "Your example taught us a lot about what real leadership looks like." Colonel Reynolds joined the gathering, eager to meet the legendary soldier whose actions had catalyzed so many positive changes. "Lieutenant Mitchell, your temporary assignment here had impacts far beyond the immediate mission. We've implemented new protocols for recognizing and developing talent." "Ma'am, that's gratifying to hear," Sarah replied. "Every soldier has unique capabilities. The key is creating environments where those capabilities can be identified and utilized effectively." During her brief visit, Sarah toured the transformed training facilities and observed exercises that reflected lessons learned from her time at the base. The tactical approaches were more sophisticated, the leadership styles more inclusive, and the overall atmosphere more professional. "You've built something impressive here," she told Colonel Reynolds privately. "This unit will be ready for any challenges that come their way." "We learned from the best teacher," Reynolds replied. "Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from unexpected sources." As Sarah prepared to depart, the assembled soldiers gathered to express their gratitude and respect. She had spent only 6 weeks among them, but her influence would last for generations of military personnel who learned from the example she had set. "Remember," she told them in her final address, "true strength doesn't need to announce itself. Focus on competence, treat everyone with respect, and never underestimate the capabilities of those around you. The person standing next to you might possess exactly the skills you need when crisis strikes." Her words carried special weight because everyone present had witnessed their truth firsthand. The quiet female soldier they had barely noticed had turned out to be their salvation in the most critical moment. The black SUV carried Sarah away from the base once again, but this time her departure marked the beginning of a new chapter rather than the end of an assignment. The lessons learned from her brief presence would influence military training and leadership development for years to come. Colonel Reynolds stood watching the vehicle disappear, reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had transformed her command. A single soldier's competence and professionalism had exposed fundamental flaws in leadership thinking, while demonstrating the potential that exists in every unit. "Real heroes don't always look like we expect them to," she murmured to Lieutenant Colonel Davis, "but they're there when we need them most." The base continued its daily operations with renewed purpose and understanding. Sarah Mitchell had returned to her elite SEAL team duties, but her legacy lived on in the soldiers she had inspired and the leaders she had educated about the true nature of strength and capability. The story had begun with a general mocking a quiet female soldier, not knowing she was a skilled Navy SEAL. It ended with an entire military community understanding that heroism comes in many forms, and the most dangerous warriors are often those who need no recognition to know their worth.